the Genesis Starliner. If there ever was a ship that symbolized humanity's ability to freely travel among the stars, reaching distant homeworlds and the bustling new cities among countless colonized planets, well, the Starliner is the one ship you would think of first. Designed to take common passengers to their distant destination with ease and comfort, and most importantly, doing so efficiently and without breaking anyone's wallet. The Genesis Starliner may not have built the worlds within the growing empire, but it makes traveling to them possible and affordable. For all the masses of humans who have chosen to live out among the stars, the Genesis Starliner will get them there. Hi boys and girls, I'm Sir Berticus, and I'm here to remind you of a ship that many of you may have forgotten about, the Genesis Starliner. First introduced to us near the end of 2014, it was to be the first ship of Crusader Industries, a brand new ship manufacturer we had never heard of before. And while it was briefly touched on again in an Around the Verse episode a year later, it was nonetheless forgotten and seemingly abandoned. That was until just over 3 years ago, when we got another Crusader ship introduced to us, the Hercules Starlifter, followed by the Mercury Starrunner, both which are now flying in the game, and a fourth Crusader ship is already on the way, the Ares Starfighter.
Genesis Starliner, why aren't you making it, you coward? Why don't we just make all the ships in the order in which they were introduced?
A few reasons. One, a lot of those older ships, their concepts are very, they're not as in-depth as the modern concepts are. So when we do concepts now, we do full interior breakdowns, full item placement breakdowns. A lot of those older ships do not have that stuff.
And there you have it, boys and girls. The Genesis Starliner was sold as a concept ship in the early days of development without a floor plan, because in those days nobody seemed to think it important enough to matter yet. And if you want to know what can happen when you put a big ship into production with only exterior concept art to go by, well, just look at the Starfarer and the Carrack. One has an interior that doesn't quite make sense, while the other had to get its exterior radically altered to make it fit inside a hangar. And the Starliner is subject to the same problem. We have beautiful shots of how gorgeous it looks on the outside, but none that tells us how the interior is supposed to fit together. Unfortunately, fate has kept the Starliner from undergoing the same fate thus far, due to the fact that passenger transport is not yet a required gameplay, and until that game mechanic comes due, we still have some time to come up with some ideas, and that's why I make my drawings. Now, if you've been a fan of this ship as long as myself and Jared, then you may have seen some of my earlier floor plans from 2017 and 2018. And as proud as I was of my work back then, it hasn't aged very well. In fact, I can now say it's completely outdated, except for perhaps a few circulation ideas that I'd like to keep, and are still possible. Back in 2017, when I made my original floor plan, I knew nothing about the Crusader Industry Style Guide, nothing about how the walls or doors would look concave and circular, or how the cockpits would be laid out as spacious with seats that slide far back on rails. The Mercury Starrunner and Hercules Starlifter didn't even exist on paper back then, so I just started drawing based on the exterior hull shape, and as I know now, that's not how it's done. CIG likes to use a modular approach to shipbuilding. With all the knowledge acquired since then and knowing Crusader design style, it's now possible to piece together the interior floor plan of the Genesis Starliner. Now, instead of just posting my floor plan on Spectrum, I thought it best to actually give you a personal guided tour of the Starliner as I envision it to be, explaining my thoughts and reasoning along the way. I'm going to get to that floor plan in just a few minutes, but before some of you disagree with what you're about to see, let me just explain why I chose to draw it on a modified silhouette. The Genesis Starliner was introduced to us as being 85 meters long and 90 meters wide. That's wider than it's long. Compare that to the Carrack, which we can all agree on is about the largest ship you'll ever be able to fit inside a large hangar, and at roughly 75 meters wide it's already having a problem fitting through the hangar door, so you can immediately surmise that the Starliner will never fit in the hangar when it's 15 meters wider than a Carrack. Or to put it into another context, the Starliner is about as wide as two Starfarers. Actually, come to think of it, the name Starfarer implies that it was also made by Crusader, but that's another debate. We also know that the other Crusader ships look drastically different in exterior design language from the much older Genesis, so the exterior is due for a rework, But I don't mean a complete departure from the original artwork. No, I mean some basic cosmetic changes to make her look like she's related to her siblings without losing her original identity. So for this next portion, I'll go into live mode. I don't have a fancy microphone, so my apologies if my voice doesn't sound clear. The problem I had with the original floor plan was that the lines of the Genesis Starliner were diverging, which means that the passenger compartment had a cabin space that was gradually getting wider. Now one of the things, and I'm just going to jump here into zoom mode, is one of the things you'll notice is that the windows where the passengers sit on the side here has an overhang from the top portion of the Genesis Starliner. It's almost like a sunscreen that casts a shadow on the passenger portion. So what I'm proposing with my design is that the diverging lines here, the non-parallel lines, is actually due to the overhang, whereas the actual cabin underneath has parallel lines. This will make the interior layout a lot easier to put together. And at strategic places, the fuselage will get wider and then it'll become parallel again, with the yellow lines here denoting where the top portion of the hull overhangs the passenger cabin. That out of the way, the front profile, I've got the old on the left and the new on the right. I'll be proposing a staircase in the nose underneath the cockpit, and that will be the primary means for passengers to get on and off the ship, as passengers will be able to walk two abreast. Of course, that won't be working on a space station, but wherever you land in a hangar or on an outdoor landing pad, this would be the preferred way to get inside. The height, I've shrunk it down a little bit. I still think we should be able to get all the floors in here, and of course the wingspan will be reduced a bit. In the new Crusader style, the wings will be filled in except for one duct, and this portion over here that'll be filled in will become space to be used up for the main deck. The cockpit window was always a little bit too small, so I've made that bigger, more like the Hercules Starlifter. And the landing gear was comically placed together where the Starliner looked like it could tip over at any moment, so I've put that out for a wider stance. I've also reduced this person a little bit, as that just didn't seem to fit the skill properly. This would be a more proper skill, meaning you can still walk underneath here, and I would imagine that the bottom of the Starlifter is approximately the same height off the floor as the Mercury Starrunner. Let's go down here and look at the back end, which will have a more dramatic change. So the original engines do not fit the new Crusader style, and it'll likely get replaced by something along this line, which will probably be engines copied and pasted directly from the Hercules Starlifter. Now the Starlifter doesn't need to haul tonks, so the cargo ramp will probably be more along the line of the Mercury Starrunner. I would actually suggest they copy and paste the exact same thing, with the landing gear being pushed outward again for stability, and the wing sections filled in. If you're wondering what this little thing is here, that would be the defensive turret on the back. It's the only gun that the Starlifter has. And now we're going to get to a more important part. The original Starliner had a main deck which was sloped, indicated by how these windows over here were sloped as well. It wasn't level with the floor, meaning that my floor plan had to incrementally stage upward, which made for an awkward design. I'm proposing, and I've quickly drawn that in on the side here, that these floors will become level. And for the cargo deck, which can stack cargo a little bit higher in the back here, I propose that we put a small staircase in, which will only go up half a floor, to get the main deck streaming over top of the main cargo deck, and then we have the upper, we'll call that the more privileged section up on top. I did mention a staircase. Since this is a passenger liner, I want as many ways to get on and off the ship. We're going to get 40 plus passengers and crew on here. I want all sorts of means to get them on and all sorts of means to get them off. So if you can just picture this floor to be level for a moment, what I propose is not only to have a docking port, to have some elevators in the bottom if need be. If you want to treat them like cattle, I suppose you can bring them in and out the rear ramp, but also a proper staircase that the passengers can walk out of. So from the main deck, they would walk down the grand staircase here to the lower deck, where an articulated staircase would then fold down from underneath the cockpit, and they would then take a second staircase down and they can walk out freely. The original artwork was showing a bespoke staircase vehicle that would have to drive up to the Starliner, and depending on where you're going to land, you don't want to be dependent on a specific type of vehicle to get your passengers on or off the ship. So I proposed that the staircase would be integrated into the hull itself. It just makes a lot more sense. Now, some of you may have seen this redesign on Spectrum, and I want to emphasize that this is just my example of how the Genesis might end up looking different when it arrives in our hangar. I'm in no way saying that it has to look like this, it's just an example, folks, don't get too worked up about it. The important thing to take note of is that the shape and size of the main body has remained unchanged. The only parts that I tweaked in this design were the 4 wings, and I added a couple of protruding bits to the tail. But all that doesn't really matter if the main topic of this video is to show you the interior floor plan. But since I happen to draw that floor plan on this particular silhouette shape, I just thought I should let everyone know that it's the same body. Well, actually no, it's the same body and shape, but I shrunk it down by about 5%, from 85 meters down to 81 meters, just to make sure that I had some margin of error to work with, because while I think my floor plan is very close to scale, I know it isn't exactly to scale. So if I can make it all fit inside a Genesis that's 5% smaller, then it's likely to still fit inside one that's 85 meters long, or if need be, 90 meters long, which is about as long as I'm willing to go with the Starliner. CIG has a habit of making ships much bigger than intended, and I'm here to tell you that the Starliner doesn't need to grow. Okay, I can already hear some of you bursting out that they like having a big ship, and that they like to have it made even bigger, as they perceive this to add value to their pledge, but I'm here to tell you that the Starliner is better off staying exactly the size it is, between 80 and 90 meters. I already explained that the wingspan has to get smaller, so making her body longer at the same time is just going to destroy her original appearance. But perhaps the question we need to ask at this point is, how big is the Genesis in relation to other passenger ships that we'll end up having in the game? There are going to be other passenger ships at some point. If you can compare it to today's passenger planes, then I would place the Genesis right in the middle of the pack. In this case, Boeing 737, the most ordered, purchased, and most produced airliner in the world, unlike the bigger one next to it, which is probably the most recognized airliner in the world, only because of its unique shape and sheer size. The 737 was and still is very popular with most major airlines, beating out its bigger cousin in quantity by a big margin. And that's because its average size allows it to operate out of more than just big airports. It can service directly to average airports, which allows you to connect to more cities, all the while filling a higher percentage of your available seats. And I hope I don't have to explain to anyone that empty seats don't make any money. It's better to fill a medium plane to full capacity than to fill a really big plane to only half capacity. And this same principle applies to Star Citizen. Each of the cities that we currently have in the PU will likely end up being the biggest city on each of those planets, having the biggest spaceport that that planet will likely have, meaning that the other cities CIG plans to add to these planets later down the road will likely be somewhat smaller, with possibly smaller spaceports, or perhaps none at all, meaning you'll have to land on an open landing pad and disembark via stairs. And if the Starliner ends up being the size of, say, a Carrack or even a Polaris, well, then there might be communities full of potential passengers that you'll never be able to sell tickets to because your ship is simply too big to land there. Or if it could land there, then you wouldn't be able to fill even half of all the seats because you have too many seats on your really big ship. So you see, having a bigger Starliner actually works against you, as it reduces the number of communities that you can provide a service to, which has the effect of driving more competing Starliners to operate out of the same fewer locations that you can fly in and out of, resulting in less seats getting filled on each of those Starliners, while forcing you to charge a lower price for the seats that you do manage to fill. Just take my word for it, guys, you don't want a bigger Starliner. And speaking of charging for a seat, don't think you can just charge as much per passenger as you would on a 600i or an 890 Jump. No, those ships are luxury yachts, or cruise ships. On the Starliner, passengers expect you to get them from point A to point B as fast as possible, and that means traveling at high speed in a straight line because, well, they just want to get to point B. An Origin ship, on the other hand, is more designed to take detours and stop for sightseeing and take shore excursions. An origin ship isn't likely to get you to point B in a straight line. In fact, more often than not, it might actually take you right back to point A. And that's because on an origin ship, your experience is the ship itself, while the Starliner is simply a means to get somewhere fast. Just get me there. And time is everything, folks. When Jared said the Starliner could be the most profitable ship in the game, I don't think he was just making that up. Consider, for example, that a container of cargo will get you a higher profit margin the further you deliver that cargo from its source. That is, until you start to encroach on another source of that same cargo, whether it be another mine, refinery, or factory that produces the same product, and then your profit margin will start to shrink again. With most cargo, there's a finite range and thus a finite profit margin that you can get from it. Compare that with passengers, where the money you can charge for each seat scales linear with every star system you travel, and there's no limit. Of course, there is a downside to every upside, and when it comes to hauling passengers, you cannot simply stop and log out of the game at any point, since that would ruin your reputation, not to mention the possibility of leaving any real players who are passengers stranded on your ship, who would prevent your ship from spawning out of existence during the time that you're not online. Alright, boys and girls, I've stalled long enough. It's time to get into the actual floor plan, so get ready to have a seat aboard your Starliner, keep your arms and legs inside the vehicle at all times, and at the end of the trip, remember to return your flight attendant to her usual upright position. Actually, I think the term flight attendant is gender neutral. Let's start drawing. And here we go. Now, I may need to apologize for any noise in the background. My microphone isn't all that great, and for some reason I couldn't get the mouse any bigger. But I usually start with a square, the holy grail in Star Citizen, one SCU that measures 1.25 meters wide by 1.25 meters long. Based on that, we can add some armrests and a backrest, and we've got ourselves a chair. Now, the only seats that are usually this wide is something like you might see on the Constellation Phoenix, which is a luxury ship. Some of the other seats in the game, like a jump seat, might only be just slightly wider than half an SCU, and some of the regular seats are only about 3/4 of an SCU wide. But if I go with this, then you can always scale it down. It's always easier to remove something you have than to try and add something that you don't. You add some legs and feet, and then we need some space in front for people to walk by, turn around, and to sit down, and you've got yourself a standard seat unit. You copy and multiply that as many times as you want, and now you've got seating sections for the Genesis Starliner. If you know the size of a seat, then you can also figure out the size of a toilet, and with that you can make yourself one of the novelty bathrooms that you see on Crusader ships, complete with the novelty door that slides up and down like a clamshell. Now, since a player character is 1.8 meters in length and two SCUs are 2.5 meters in length, this makes the perfect template to make a bed. If you want a locker at the end, you use another SCU, and then you encapsulate that into a sleeping pod, one on top of the other, kind of like you see in the Vanguard. And if you copy that again across from a room with enough space between them for two people to do-si-do, then you've got yourself a sleeping pod chamber. Now, the door is just wide enough for one SCU box to go through, because if you look, for example, at the Freelancer, the doors don't quite seem wide enough for one SCU to fit through, but of course they must, otherwise those containers can get into the front cargo room. And a player is narrower than one SCU, so that's what I use to base my doors on. Now, if you recycle all those assets, you can make yourself a habitation chamber like we're familiar with Crusader. So I've got two beds with a ladder, I've got a novelty bathroom, two lockers, and the door here off on the side. Similarly, you can also create a recreation room. You recycle the seat, you stretch it out to two SCU, you've got yourself a dining table. Now, the desk I had to kind of visually guess at about 2.5 SCU. That can be stretched a little bit wider or narrower. Again, I'm drawing everything 5% smaller than it should be for wiggle room. Once you get through the door, you end up in a corridor. The door is wide enough for one SCU, but since the corridors tend to be round and the ceiling height tends to be about 2 SCU in height with a little bit underneath the floor, well, then the width of the corridor would have to be at least 2 SCU wide as well, and that's what I base my corridors on. So let's get into the main attraction. So I'll quickly go over some of the stats. The description you can read online. I'm not going to bore you with all the details that you can look up yourself online. The dimensions, the height of 15 meters, that's never going to work. It'll always be about 18 to 20 meters high. Passenger capacity, CIG wanted 40. I put a plus sign behind it because with a module you can increase that. Cargo capacity 300, again a plus sign because of the modules that you can add. Now it is a large ship, but it only comes with one medium radar. You won't be able to see as far as other large ships. I went with one medium radar on this design, but I'm kind of hoping CIG might change their mind and give us a large radar after all. The power core, it has one large power core. However, since you have human lives on board, you want redundancy. So to keep the life support running and gravity running, just for redundancy, there's a medium power core, just in case you neglect to maintain the main power core. Nothing was ever said about life support or the batteries. Now for life support, I would refer to the Anvil Valkyrie, which has 20 soldiers and 5 crew, which is 25 people on a medium-sized ship. If you base your medium life support unit on that, and assuming that there's no such thing as a large life support unit, just like computers only come in small and medium, then the Genesis Starliner would need 2 medium life support units for its 40 plus crew. But since I already said that there's going to be a module to add even more, and here's a spoiler for you, it'll go all the way up to 72, I'm going to need 3 life support units. Batteries, well, it's always easier to remove than it is to add in later, so I went with 2 medium batteries in there. And don't forget you also have that medium redundancy power core. Features, the Starliner was set to be modular, which it is. Mixmaster, I've got more than one. Flight entertainment system, yes. Medical cabinet, yes. So let's get into it. Now, as I already pointed out before, there is an articulated staircase under the nose of the Starliner, so it is possible perhaps that these seats are elevated, in which case you would have the rails work quite the same as the Mercury Starrunner, where they turn around and then go up a ramp. If that's not required, then just picture this like the Hercules Starlifter. There's a gun rack on the side here for 4 guns, again not required. CIG probably just wants pistols here in the center console. But it's always easier to remove than it is to add in later, so I drew it in anyway. Medium radar and 2 medium computers stacked on top of each other in the back of the cockpit. You go through a standard door, you've got your rounded corridor that we're all familiar with, and we get to our front lobby. Down the stairs, which is 2.5 SCU wide, so 2 passengers at a time can walk down here. And the most controversial thing that I've drawn on the ship is 2 escape pods. These are the only 2 escape pods on the ship. Folks, a maximum of 72 people on board. I can't put 72 escape pods in this design. That would be crazy. If you wanted to go with the standard escape module, which can seat 8 people, I would still need 6 of them, and it again would take up almost half the ship. The Starliner is a sibling of the Starrunner. If the Starrunner gets out of trouble by running, then I would suggest if you have 40 to 72 people on board, you run as well. That's why you don't have guns on the front of this ship. But if you're just hauling cargo and nothing else, all you need is a pilot and a co-pilot, and 2 escape pods will do just fine. Beyond that, we have the main corridor, which is wide enough for 2 people. And we have a section where the seats are facing each other with windows on either side. Looking at you, Origin. Behind that we have a docking port, the galley, and we have a bigger section. Now these are all facing forward, and again they all have windows. Now the docking port obviously is for docking at a space station. As we've seen in Fleet Week, the docking port is only wide enough for 1 passenger to walk through at a time. That's why this staircase is preferred, because 2 can walk out at a time. You can load and unload passengers twice as fast. Now it is entirely possible you might be flying through a region of space. Let's say Hurston Security comes along and says you have a passenger that's wanted. and their Cutlass Blue wants to dock with you. It has a round docking port, you have a square docking port. I don't know if those two are going to connect. So for a while I was actually tempted to put a round docking port on the other side, but since, say, the Starlifter doesn't have any docking port at all, and it might get interdicted by Hertz and security as well, I figured, well, I'm just going to keep the square one. If CIG wants to put a round docking port on this ship, then they'll have to put it down below. There's actually a room here where you can modify it for a round docking port. The galley is just big enough for one person to stand in. Now, with 40 passengers, one flight attendant ought to do. If you have two flight attendants, well, then one will bring something to the front section while the second one comes in. It leaves while the first one comes back, and you take turns in the galley. Here's your flight entertainment system. It's a library of movies that the passengers can watch on their screen. It doesn't have to be here. It can be in the back of the cockpit. It can be in the engineering section. It can be in the cargo bay. I had to draw it somewhere, so here I just put it here for now. The passengers will order from their screen instead of you walking up to them and talking to them in person. Whenever they order something, a blue light, I imagine, will start flashing in the hallways, so wherever the flight attendant happens to be, you would notice that an order has been placed. You then go to the galley and you grab whatever it is they ordered. You have a food container here, or a food cabinet, for a limited choice of sandwiches, protein bar, chocolate bar, maybe a bag of peanuts, not too much because you have to stock a certain quantity of each one. Then we have your coffee and tea dispenser, milk, sugar, it all gets done via the computer, and then we have your mix master. Mix master only needs to be wide enough to put one glass underneath it. It is tied into the computer. Now, since the order was placed electronically and the Mixmaster is a computer as well, it has a library of the ingredients for each drink, so I don't see why we would have to manually input the quantities of all the different liquors that make up a drink. It's silly. It might be interesting in the beginning, but after a while, I'm telling you, it's going to get really boring. Your job is to get it to the passenger in time, because if he waits too long, then you're going to get a bad review, and also to make sure you get it to the correct seat, because that again will affect your rating. So moving behind here, by the way, 16 plus 24, that's your 40 seats. These do not change out. You cannot exchange this for cargo. This is permanent. Just like the Starfarer has refineries and piping that you can never change out for cargo. This is a passenger liner. These are your passenger seats. They are permanent. But we move to the back, and now we're going to go up above the main cargo hold. So here's your little staircase that goes up half a floor. And I'll zoom in a little bit just for detail. We have two toilets. Now, these are not exactly the same as we're familiar with on Crusader, but we do still have the novelty doors. And again, we have a traverse corridor here, which is wide enough for two people to walk through. I put a window in the corner, which could likely give you a really nice view. No matter which way you walk down the corridor, you'll always have a view out. And then here we have our medical cabinet. Now, we don't know too much about the medical cabinet. It has medical spray guns, first aid packs. It could be the size of a backpack that you put on. It could be a small trolley on wheels that you have to push around. It might just be shelves with individual items on it. I don't know. It can be made wider, and since everything on this ship was drawn to a skill that can be increased by 5%, there it is, folks. I don't know what else to draw. There's two means to get upstairs. We have a grand staircase, or you can take the lift. This passenger lift is based on the Mercury Starliner, minus the cargo bars on it to make it look a little bit more adapted for passenger use. And then beyond here we have the large round circular door that we've seen on some of the Crusader ships, and there's our central module. Now, I haven't drawn anything in here for now, since this is just a blank slate. One of the things you will notice is that there is a modular wall. This modular wall provides access to a ladder down to the cargo deck, as well as a cargo lift which can store 2x2x2 SCU, as well as a place for a rider and a control pad. This modular wall will vanish if you add the cargo module, but if you add anything else, this wall will be up to block. So if you're in the cargo deck, you can come up via the ladder only to go down via the lift. Hey, what fun. You'll notice I've drawn some arrows on here, and that's because to get to the back of the ship you have to go through this module. If you don't have any module installed, well, then the default would likely be a blank corridor, which simply goes from front to back. Arriving at the back of the module, you have a door which is for crew only, and it'll get you to another transverse corridor with medium power components. Or actually, here's your medium power component with your 3 life support units, and this is very similar to what we've seen on the Mercury Starliner and the Hercules Starlifter. At the end of the corridor, we have our habitation. So we have our recreation unit, as I've shown you before, with a kitchen. Now, if this kitchen isn't big enough, then you can get rid of the desk and put another kitchen over here. Or if the CRG says, we do need this desk because we need a screen, well, then you can always put some refrigeration and food storage over here. CRG has all sorts of options. On the other side of the corridor is our sleeping quarters. And again, here's your 2 bunk beds for 4 crew, 2 bathrooms, 4 lockers. And here's the room that goes to the main engine room, and this is where your large components are. Large shield, large power, 2 large coolers, and a large quantum jump drive. At the end we have our little windows where you can see the engines, kind of the same as what you have with the Hercules Starlifter. And that makes up the main deck. Now we're gonna go move upstairs. And upstairs you can either come up through the lift or you can come up through the main staircase. As you come upstairs, you'll be underneath a skylight, which is on either side of the upper deck. And there's a upper main module which is tied to the upper minor module, meaning whenever you change this out, the corresponding minor module will fit in. If you change one, you also change the other. They're linked together as a pair, and in a moment you'll see why. In the first of all, there's another public washroom over here, because you might get quite a crowd up here. 3 staterooms. Each one of these staterooms is fixed, permanently fixed. You can't take it out, they'll always be there. You have a desk, you have a toilet, you have a mini kitchen. They could always order from the galley, I suppose. You have a locker and 1 bed and a potted flower. This takes up about the same equivalent of 8 to 10 passenger seats. However, each one of these staterooms also gets one of the seats up front, so I would go with the volume of 10 regular seats, which means you can charge 10 times the amount of a regular seat. You got 3 of these, that's the equivalent revenue of another 30 seats that you have here. Moving on, here we have a small area for the bar. Now this is not currently in use, this is crew only for this door, and here you see a dotted wall which will only appear whenever this room isn't in use. So depending on which module you have in place, this wall is either up or it's not. These 4 seats that we have up front, if you're wondering why there's 4 seats and well, we only have 3 staterooms, well, I'll let you guess what one of the modules is going to be. They look up front, and again we have skylights here. Remember, you're on the upper deck and the ceiling does slope down. You can look, well, you can't look into the toilets, they'll have their own ceiling, but you can see the main seating sections up front. But through the skylight you also have a view like the pilot, because you can also look up and in front and outside of the ship. So this is actually one of the best places to sit on the ship. Behind here we have the engines further down. You have your only weapons on the ship. It's an aft-facing turret, 2 times size 4, unless CRG rethinks that, but right now it's 2 times size 4. Moving down, below the engine room, we get to the cargo deck. We have a cargo ramp which will be based on the Mercury Starliner, since you won't be able to put anything bigger than an Ursa in here. The main cargo room here has the novelty walls that slope at about I think 45-degree angle. You can't put any cargo on it. On either side, here's your landing gear. The original landing gear would be right here where the cargo goes. They had to be moved out wider, and then they would interfere with the cargo lift, so I split them up. One half goes to the back, the other half is moved up front. If CIG says, well, that looks a little bit funny, well, you can always take these away. It's easier to remove than it is to add in later. The cargo stacks 6 wide by 3 tall, which is again the same as the Mercury Starliner, except you can walk on both sides this time, and the cargo bay is about twice as deep. You have direct access to your cargo lift, to the ladder, and the passenger lift, which reaches every deck. The cargo lift only goes up to the main deck. The lift goes up to all 3 decks. At the end of the cargo bay, you have a wide door that is 3.5 SCU wide. You'll see later on why. And this is a telescoping door where the door slides into a door which slides into the wall, kind of like how the hangars do it. Here's your forward cargo bay. It isn't as tall. We'll get into the details here later on. And then here we have all sorts of options. So this is your gravity ball, your 2 medium batteries, and a couple of control panels. If CIG decides to put in a large radar, then likely the gravity ball will move to one side, the medium radar might go to the other side. There's all sorts of options here. The next room is 2 lifts. As I said, on a passenger ship I want every means possible to get on and off. So with the 2 lifts, you can easily put 3 people on at a time. You can probably squeeze 6 people on at a time. That's 12 people at a time. In 6 trips, you can get the entire passenger and crew off the ship. However, there is a bottleneck here where you can only have 1 person walk through at a time. If CIG wants, this can be changed over into that round docking port. I mean, there's all sorts of options again. And the lift is going to be based on what you see on the Hercules Starlifter. The next room, I made a small EVA room. It could be changed. I've got 4 gun racks again. Could be for tractor beams, could be for cutters, it could be whatever CIG wants. And just like I had 2 escape pods for the 2 crew that will fly the ship if you have cargo, there's 2 EVA suits next to the lifts. The familiar round corridor, just like we have behind the cockpit, and that'll lead you up to another foyer. If you go up, then you get back to the passenger compartment. If you go down, well, this is the articulated staircase which folds down to let passengers on and off the ship, which is underneath the cockpit, which is the reason why perhaps the cockpit seats themselves might be raised up like you have with the Mercury Starliner. Let's take a look at how I propose the Starlifter is going to be presented to you if you have purchased it. Passengers is now going to be 44, and that is because you have 4 staterooms in the back, and that already gives away what the first module is going to be, or the default module is going to be. Your cargo capacity, instead of 300 SCU, it's 294, and keep in mind the primary reason to have a Starliner is for passenger transport. 294 might already be a little bit too big, and I'll show how CIG will have all sorts of options. You can nerf this down to 250, you can even bring it up to 450. There's tons of options here. The crew, my suggestion, 2 to 4 if you have cargo or if you have passengers. And standard configuration will give you 24 sleeping pods. Why 24 instead of 44? I'll get to that in a moment. So once again, the front of the ship is the same. The seats can't be changed out, so that is the same until we get to our central module. And I'll show both decks here at the same time. So on the main deck, we have our familiar sleeping pod module that I showed earlier on how it was made, copied 6 times over with a central corridor to get to the back. Now the reason we have 24 sleeping pods is quite simple. If you've ever been on a flight that is across the ocean, you'll notice that most people tend to just sleep in their seat. Also keep in mind that human beings only sleep 1/3 of the time. But since you picked up the passengers at a common point, they're probably all in the same sleep cycle. The passengers can check on their screen, just like they would order a sandwich. They can see if a sleeping pod is available, they can order it, they get assigned a sleeping pod room and a bunk, and they can go back here and lie in it. If you want to sleep in a seat, then you just sleep in the seat. Now there is a minor issue with this. That is when the Genesis arrives at its destination, these passengers need to get off. So as was described with the Banu Merchantman, when the owner closes the store and tells everybody to get off, you might have 15 or 20 minutes to get off. If you're not off, you're going to be deemed an undesirable. Security can come, you might even be labeled as hostile, and they can take you off by force. But that still leaves the possibility that a real player who might have purchased a ticket on your Genesis might be on board, and he might have gone to sleep in the sleeping pod. So at the end of the trip, when you tell everybody to get off, that real player would still be sitting in this pod. So just as you have right now in the game, you might get teleported into the spaceport, wherever the Genesis has landed. Now, in that case, currently you would wake up again the next time that player would spawn in would be at the L19. If this is Lorville, it would be the L19 habitat. However, since I already said that one of your passengers might be a wanted criminal, he would have now effectively bypassed security and customs, which is an exploit. So for that reason, I would suggest that in the back of every security at major landing zones, that one of the doors would lead to a similar chamber like this, where the real player would then log in, let's say the next day, would step out of the pod to find himself in the back of security and would still have to go through security. Moving to the upper deck, here I've added one module which is a fourth stateroom, and that explains why we got 4 seats up here. And as a minor module, I've got 2 chairs on a table playing a chess game. And as you can see, the little modular wall is up here because you won't be able to get to the mixmaster if you do order a drink. A flight attendant can always come up, go through this door, make a drink, and give it to you. But there's other options as well. The cargo. Let's not forget about this. So here I've drawn in the cargo, 198 SCU. Again, 6 wide, 3 tall, and almost twice as wide as a Mercury Starliner. In the front, I've drawn in the maximum capacity. This is 96 SCU on either side, and the first thing that CIG will probably point out is no, because these walls are square, they're vertical, and that is not like these walls over here, which have the typical style guide for Crusader, that inclined 45-degree angle. So if CIG wants, they can add in the angular wall pieces, but then your cargo capacity is reduced. And this is what I said before, there's all sorts of options. If CIG says this is already too much cargo for a passenger airliner, well, we can shrink it down to about 240 or 250 right there. And the rest of the ship up front is the same. Now, another upper module that we can get to is entertainment. So in this particular case, the 4th stateroom is gone. I've added a small dance floor, a couple of benches, and a piano, which can be copied and pasted straight from the constellation Phoenix. And now I've added a bar. So now that small wall is gone, you're going to need a 3rd crew member, because he's going to have to man this bar. It's got the mixmaster and 4 seats. If you want more people to come up here and enjoy, well, you can put in a bigger bar. So this is where the main module and the minor module get joined together into one. You got 9 seats this time. You have 2 mixmasters. Again, entrance for the bartender. You might want to put 2 bartenders up here, and everyone will have a fun time. And the more they drink, the more they'll have to go to this washroom right there. Now for the main module on the main floor, here's your cargo module. So this is where the modular wall here has been removed, and now the cargo lift has free access to put your cargo in here. It would also mean that this door now becomes crew only as well, since passengers have no business being in here. Now this is 144 SCU, so the maximum capacity is now going to get close to a Carrack. As a matter of fact, CIG has the option to also put cargo containers here on this side, in which case you could even surpass a Carrack. Again, I'll leave that entirely up to CIG. But what else could you put here? Well, you could put in a cafeteria. So I've taken the dining section here and I've copied that 4 times. That's 16 people that can sit down. Food dispensers, this could be dispensing drinks or bags of chips or sandwiches, I mean whatever CIG wants to do. I'm not going to say that this will generate a lot of revenue, but it will certainly increase your review. And then just for good measure, I'll put some arcade games here like we saw on the Javelin. What else can you put in for a main module? Well, extra seats. I already said that the Starliner could go up to a maximum of 72 seats. And that's by putting 24 seats over here. I tried to spruce it up a little bit by adding some little tables and some flowers. But keep in mind, there are no windows. So because there are no windows, you'll never be able to charge as much as these seats over here, which are also closer to the galley. However, it will increase your revenue. There are still more options as well, as for example, you could put 3 sleeping pod chambers on this side, which will sleep 12, and then you'd still have 12 passenger seats here. You would also have the option of adding, let's say, an extra galley in the back here, so that you can have an extra food station to provide drinks and meals to these people. There's so many options here. This is just an example. And with that, we are done. I'll zoom it out here for a moment. Now this will be posted up on Spectrum. It probably won't fit all in one picture, so I'll have to chop it up into 3. But this is your Genesis Starliner. So I thank you for taking the time to listen to my personal tour of what the Genesis Starliner might look like, no promises, and I hope you enjoyed the tour. And with that, I'll bid you goodbye and good luck in the verse.